The dust hung in the air like a shroud that summer of 1887, thick enough to taste, fine enough to choke on. In the Panhandle of Texas, where the Llano Estacado stretched flat and unforgiving toward the horizon, the sky had forgotten how to weep. Creeks that once ran knee-deep in spring now cracked like old leather underfoot. Corn stalks stood brittle and brown, heads bowed as if in apology. Cattle lowed in weak protest from barren pastures, ribs sharp against hides that had lost their shine months ago. Elias Crowe owned what was left of the Bar C spread, 300 acres claimed in '79 when the railroad promised rain would follow the plow. He had believed it then. Now the plow rusted in the shed, and the promises had dried up with the earth. Elias was 34, but the lines carved around his eyes made him look a decade older. His wife, Mary, had died 2 winters back in childbirth, taking their only son with her. The grave markers stood small and lonely behind the house, bleached white by the same merciless sun that baked everything else. He rose before first light each morning, not because there was work worth doing, but because lying in the empty bed felt like drowning. He walked the fence lines that no longer held anything worth containing, checked the windmill that pumped a trickle of brackish water into a half-empty tank, and stared at the sky as if daring it to break. It never did. 20 miles east, in the fading town of Dry Wells, named with bitter irony, Lydia Hart kept the shutters closed against the glare and the questions. She had come west 3 years earlier as Lydia Prescott, mail-order bride to a storekeeper named Amos Hart. Amos had been kind enough in his letters, promising a life of quiet respectability. What he delivered was a clapboard store, a gambling debt larger than the inventory, and a temper sharpened by whiskey. When the drought deepened and the customers stopped coming, Amos took the last of the cash box and vanished on a southbound stage. Folks said he headed for California. Folks said worse. Lydia never asked. She stayed because she had nowhere else. The store was hers now by default, though the shelves grew emptier by the week. She sold what little remained, flour gone weevily, beans hard as pebbles, salt that tasted of nothing, and took in mending to keep body and soul from parting company. Her hands, once soft from Boston parlors, were cracked and calloused. Her dark hair, which Amos had once complimented, she kept pinned tight beneath a plain bonnet. No one remarked on her beauty anymore. Hardship had pared it down to something quiet and watchful. One blistering afternoon in late July, Elias rode into Dry Wells on a horse-tooth into canter. He needed nails, 4 pounds, if they could be spared, and a length of rope to brace a sagging corral post. The store was dim inside, the air still and heavy with the smell of old burlap and dust. Lydia stood behind the counter, ledger open, though there was little to record. "Afternoon, ma'am," Elias said, removing his hat. His voice was rough from disuse. She looked up. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Something flickered there, recognition, perhaps, of shared ruin. "Nails are 2 cents a pound," she said. "Rope's a nickel a foot." He nodded, counted out the coins from a small leather pouch that jingled too lightly. As she weighed the nails, he glanced around the near-empty shelves. "Business slow. Everything's slow when the sky refuses to rain." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Ain't that the truth?" She wrapped the rope in brown paper, tied it with twine. Their fingers brushed when he took the bundle. Neither pulled away quickly. "You're from the Bar C, aren't you?" she asked. "Was. Still try to call it that. I heard. About your wife. I'm sorry." He looked at the floorboards. "Long time ago. Not long enough, I reckon." He met her gaze again. "No, not long enough." He left without another word, but the next week he returned for coffee, grounds so old they barely colored the water, and stayed to fix the loose board on her porch step. She offered him water from the well, cool if not sweet. He drank it standing, then set the tin cup down carefully. "You don't have to do that," she said, watching him work. "Got nothing better." She almost smiled. Almost. Weeks passed in that slow, parched way. Elias came more often, always with some small excuse, a hinge needing oil, a shutter hanging crooked. Lydia began leaving a chair on the porch in the shade, a pitcher of water beside it. They spoke little at first. Then more. He told her about Mary, how she sang hymns while churning butter, how the baby never drew breath. She told him about Amos, the letters full of lies, the night he struck her for the last time before disappearing. Neither offered pity. They simply listened. One evening in September, when the heat finally broke into something bearable, Elias arrived with a small sack of potatoes he dug from a patch that had somehow survived near the creek bed. Lydia cooked them with the last of her bacon grease, and they ate on the porch as the sun bled red across the horizon. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. "Every damn day. But where would I go? This is all I got left." She looked out at the empty street. "Same here." The silence stretched, comfortable now. "I keep waiting for rain," he said. "Like it'll wash everything clean. Bring her back. Bring something." "It won't bring them back," she said softly. "But maybe it'll let us start breathing again." He looked at her then, really looked. The lines on her face were not so different from his own. The weariness in her eyes mirrored what he saw in the shaving mirror each morning. "Reckon we could wait together," he said. She didn't answer right away. Instead she reached across the space between their chairs and laid her hand over his. His fingers closed around hers, rough palm against rough palm. That night the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of distant mesquite smoke. No rain came, but something else did, a small loosening in the chest, a crack in the hard shell each had built. October arrived without mercy. The last of the cattle on the Barca died in a single night, throats swollen from drinking alkali water. Elias butchered what he could salvage, smoked the meat over a slow fire, and hauled it to town in the back of his wagon. He sold most to the saloon keeper, kept enough for himself and Lydia. She helped him unload, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair escaping its pins. When the last slab was stored in her cool cellar, they stood in the dim light, breathing hard. "You didn't have to share," she said. "Didn't have to," he agreed. "Wanted to." She stepped closer. "Elias." He waited. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of hoping. Of losing again." "Me too. But I'm more scared of staying empty." He lifted a hand, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch lingered. She didn't flinch. They kissed there in the cellar, tentative at first, then deeper, as if testing whether broken things could still fit together. When they parted, her eyes were wet, not from sorrow, but from something warmer. Winter crept in early, dry and bitter. No snow, only wind that scoured the land. Elias moved into the rooms above the store, sleeping on a cot in what had been Amos's office. He fixed the roof where it leaked air instead of water, patched walls, built shelves for the few goods that still trickled in on the stage. Lydia cooked for them both, simple meals stretched thin. At night, they sat by the stove, sharing stories until the fire died to embers. In January a norther blew down from the Dakotas, fierce enough to rattle the windows. They huddled together under quilts, listening to the howl. She told him about her childhood in Massachusetts, the smell of salt air, the way her mother braided her hair. He spoke of Tennessee before the war, fishing with his father in clear streams that no longer existed. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered against his shoulder. "Neither did I." February brought no relief, but one morning Elias woke to find Lydia already up, staring out the window. He joined her. The sky was low and gray, heavy with something unfamiliar. "Clouds," she said. They watched as the first drop struck the dusty glass, then another. Slow at first, hesitant, as if the sky had forgotten how. Then harder, steady, drumming on the tin roof like applause long overdue. They stepped onto the porch. Rain soaked their clothes in seconds. Elias laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. Lydia tilted her face up, eyes closed, letting the water run down her cheeks. He pulled her close, kissed her wet mouth. "It came," he said. "Not just the rain," she answered. They stood there until the downpour eased to a gentle patter, until the earth began to drink again. The land would take time to heal, as would they. But the drought had ended, not only in the sky, but in the places inside them that had been parched longest. In the months that followed, green pushed through the cracked soil. Calves were born to the few cows Elias had bought cheap from a neighbor giving up. The store shelves filled slowly. Folks returned to dry wells, drawn by word that life might be possible again. Elias and Lydia married in April beneath a sky that held no grudge. No preacher, just the justice of the peace and 2 witnesses from the saloon. They spoke simple vows, promising not perfection, but presence. To stand together when the sky refused, and when it finally remembered. They built a small house behind the store, with a porch wide enough for 2 chairs. On quiet evenings they sat there, hands entwined, watching clouds gather and drift. Sometimes it rained, sometimes it didn't. Either way, they were no longer waiting alone. 2 broken souls had found each other in the dust and the waiting. And in the end, that was enough.